Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas. Our ongoing study in The Spiritual Life by Edgar Sheffield Brightman, published in 1942. We're going to take a look at our final lesson in this manuscript. And basically the structure of his system ended on page 176. So this final lesson is on the context within which that structure works, the context of spiritual freedom. So it's pages 176 to 215, and it addresses the context of spiritual freedom. Let's begin by taking a look at block 1. We're going to take a look at spirit is free. Spirit equals the cooperative devotion to the divine purpose, says Brightman. It comes to us in a new language, and it is what he calls magnificent life, and it must be a freedom that is supported by the entire spiritual life of the logic of faith. He talks about the negative view of freedom, which is basically freedom from impairment, as opposed to positive freedom, which is freedom for achievement. He said the Stoics took the position that the self is to be freed from all externalities, which was negation. And George Santayana took the position that the self is to escape finite experience by meditating on essences only, a position of escapism. So Brightman goes on to propose the triad of the Stoic and Santayana, and then a better position of the teleology as the higher aim of spirit which directs all of finite experience. Positive freedom rather than negative freedom. Brightman proposes positive freedom. So if you look at block 1, note 3, the positive view of freedom, Brightman's position. The aim of freedom is to direct sensate experience. It's determined by acquiring negative freedom first, and then experimental positing, and then outgoing inquiry into value, and then positive freedom as a power to achieve chosen objectives through praxis. He says that this kind of freedom fuses two powers together, the power to choose and the power to achieve. We choose through experimental positing, we achieve through interpretive construction. Remember the logic of faith. Everything is founded on the logic of faith. That is Brightman's position, the logic of faith. So this spiritual freedom fuses together that experimental positing and that interpretive construction. But posited choice always has to be followed up by praxis, by outgoing praxis toward ideals, in a cooperative action with others and with a cooperative action with divine spirit. So now we need to take a look at that outgoing rational praxis in block 2. Brightman says that under the task of freedom, we are to remake subjective self-consciousness by suppressing irrationality and affirming the eidos ideals. We judge sense data and determine true positive goals. We are also to bring our body into subjection to the spirit, learn limitations and powers of bodily existence, and then remake objective natural existence. Realize spiritual freedom by making it vital, actual expression in existence. Go out of the self and enter into dialogue with others to reach this actualization. So we enter into what Brightman calls a task of cooperative effort. It comes through cooperation with others. We seek to confirm and to share our value claims and raise them up to true values through dialogue and through cooperative praxis together. We seek cooperation with the divine spirit. Remember, this is personalism, so we seek cooperation with the personalistic divine spirit, with the divine consciousness. So we seek the task of actualizing value. We'll take a look at note 3. Available possibilities for freedom are afforded by past experience and by present conditions, but we always have a freedom within limits. It is an expression of our inner life, our inner posited eidos ideals. We inaugurate the following steps, says Brightman. We take an interest in the prescribed truth that was gained through the Dekunta threshold of dialogue with others. We affirm the reality of free choice by positing our value sign model as real, as the real. The posited real is then followed up by rational praxis, which is that interpretive construction. So our posited spirituality and our outgoing rational praxis equals the actualization of a constructed coherence of life. We are seeking coherence, a coherent sign value model, and a coherent value organized and ordered sensate reality in experience. So we've got a chance to look at that initial concept of spirit as free, and then what that means in a concrete way as outgoing rational praxis. So now we're ready to take a look at block 3. Posited spirituality and outgoing rationality bring about the responsible manifestation of spirit. It begins by talking about opportunity. Thought is a prerequisite for spiritual liberty. We should practice genuine thinking, and that means working through the Dekunta threshold of dialogue. Personal liberty is always coupled with spiritual freedom. Positive choice and outgoing rationality equal the principle of opportunity. Brightman says Hegel got it wrong. He appreciates a lot that Hegel offers, but he says Hegel gets it wrong here because he declared freedom as submission to the state. But obviously the state can be evil. So Brightman says Hegel got that wrong. He idealized the state as always enclosing God's movement. Well, sometimes it does not. Brightman says instead the state and the individual are both to be judged by the standards of spirit. Both individual and state are to be judged by standards of spirit. So under note 2, we take a look at this concept of standards of spirit. They are the guiding principles. They are the laws of spirit. Specifically, we are guided by the spiritual eidos ideals that we shape into a coherent model, which we call the kingdom. Brightman says that in the first century, the great document of freedom was the book of Revelation, because it took the kingdoms of the world and described them as the kingdoms of the Lord, that movement of spirit. So what does it mean to actualize the kingdom? It is the manifestation of spirit, and therefore it's called zeitgeist. It is the spirit of the times. What's the spirit actualization at this particular time? What is our zeitgeist? Free spirit must be experimental. It must be experimental positing. It must be ongoing experimental positing of the true, of the real. We explore possibilities. We reconcile those opposing tensions. There's your Hegel. We reconcile those opposing tensions. We raise the finite to new spiritual levels. And then he takes up Hegel again. Like I said, he can accuse and reject Hegel concerning his notion of the state, but it's absolutely our American version of Hegel, because he does take up the system of Hegel. He says, we do take up the labor of the negative. The negative equals the lost son, the prodigal son in need of restoration. We enter into a battle between blind power in opposition to the spirit of truth. Our labor seeks to reconcile and restore humanity. We seek to reconcile and to restore all of creation by lifting finite reality to a higher spiritual level through the logic of faith, which is, again, experimental positing outgoing desire for value and interpretive construction. That is Brightman's logic of faith. That is his dialectic. Experimental positing. Spirit is experimental. Experimental positing of the real. Outgoing seeking of verification through outgoing praxis of realizing those ideals takes place next. And then we have the return moment of interpretive construction, which basically is objective and subjective. We are constructing the kingdom. In reality, we are also returning inward to the self after praxis and revising our value sign model from what we've learned in ministry, what we've learned in mission, what we've learned in praxis. And so we know his system. We had our composite lesson, last lesson. We've seen our composite. We know his phenomenology of spirit. But he closes out his manuscript by saying, basically, this final chapter is an appendix. And basically he's saying it's a postscript. He's saying that this system that I now have given you takes place within a realm of spiritual freedom. And spiritual freedom encloses the individual logic of faith. Divine spiritual freedom encloses the logic of faith. And so it is ongoing dialectic. It's ongoing positing. It's ongoing praxis. It's ongoing energy actualization. So it's ongoing positing as the dunamis potentiality of spirit, then it's ongoing praxis where we go out of ourselves to attain verification, and then it is ongoing actualization, energy actualization in reality. Movement of spirit is from dunamis to energia. It's always movement from dunamis potentiality to energia actuality. And Brightman is telling us that's the movement of freedom. That's the context for his phenomenology of spirit, which is absolutely powerful and beautiful together. That last lesson on the composite phenomenology was truly a very gifted teaching from Brightman. He is a profound believing philosopher and a profound philosopher and theologian, both. And so we are greatly indebted to his teaching, and he certainly does ground his teaching in faith. He calls it the logic of faith. And it's definitely taking place within the context of the freedom of the divine personal spirit. Remember, this is Brightman's personalism. It all takes place within the divine personal spirit that's moving from dunamis potentiality to energia actuality. And within that movement, we participate with our logic of faith. That's going to wrap up this final lesson. It's going to wrap up this project that we had on the spiritual life. And all I can say is that I am greatly appreciative of a believing disciple who dedicated himself to studying the kingdom and then sharing it with us so we could reap the benefit of this profound depth of spirit. It's a great book on spirit. I just love this book. It's one of my favorites now that I've gone through it. It's one of my favorites. I think it's the best I've seen on the doctrine of the Holy Spirit or the pneumatology. I think it's the best pneumatology I've ever seen. But it's going to wrap up this project. We will discuss our next project in our next life group meeting.